We're joined by Paul Taylor. If you don't know Paul, he's a lively Irishman living in Australia, but also an incredibly smart guy. Just completed his PhD in psychophysiology, but he's got multiple master's degrees in nutrition, physiology, and neuroscience. His podcast, the Paul Taylor Podcast, is an absolute cracker and has some fabulous guests. We talk about that mind-body medicine difference, how we're going to attack some of the problems of society today, especially around the idea of hormesis and hardiness. I really liked the bit we did at the end around a new class of drugs called myostatin inhibitors. This is a class of drugs that causes you to lose weight and gain muscle, very different from the current group of weight loss drugs, the GLP-1 agonists that cause weight loss and muscle loss. These, for better or worse, are going to absolutely change the way we do medicine, and look out for them. We'll talk about that as well. So let's get into it. Prevention is Cure podcast with Paul Taylor. Hey, Paul.
Hey, how you doing, Grant?
Good. Got the Prevention is Cure podcast going again after some years, and it's going to be a regular thing. And the very first inaugural guest I thought will be Paul Taylor, soon to be Dr. Paul Taylor, already highly accredited with numerous degrees, now adding a PhD to his collection. So congratulations on getting to that part of it.
Thank you, mate. Yeah, we're about. It has all been approved, and I'm just waiting on the piece of paper. So it's been a long journey because I've had a couple of stops and starts on it. But yeah, good to finally get it knocked off.
I always wondered why you did that, because it's such an arduous task. You're already working hard, doing a lot of work. You already had multiple credentials in nutrition, physiology, exercise science. You had multiple master's degrees. You're essentially already what you were describing yourself as a pracademic, very academic but practically orientated, excellent communicator. Why go and get a PhD?
Yeah, look, a couple of reasons. It's always been burning in the back of my mind about doing a PhD. When I moved to Australia, actually we nearly moved to South Africa rather than Australia. I was talking about doing a PhD in South Africa, in Cape Town, and ended up coming to Australia, and I explored doing a PhD here, and then decided I needed to just go out and earn some money. So it's been gnawing in the back of my mind. And then psychology was something that I felt was a bit of a gap, because I had the neuroscience, the nutrition, the ex-phys, but I was speaking more and more about psychological stuff, and I'm very, very interested in it. So when the opportunity came up to do one in psychology but bringing in physiology, that got me really excited. So, I'm now going to be like you, be a proper bona fide psychophysiologist.
That's the name you're calling yourself right now. So a psychophysiologist.
Psychophysiologist, yeah, which I really like, because I think like me and you are very aligned on this. This whole idea that mind and body are separate, or brain and body are separate, is just complete and utter horseshit. And anybody who thinks that they can just solve mental health issues with talking about thinking, I think is completely and utterly bonkers, because your physiology, as you well know, Grant, has got so much of an impact on your psychology, and vice versa. Yeah,
I was just actually writing a book chapter on exactly that yesterday. I think we grossly overestimate our willpower and our chances of sorting things out by thinking and talking about things.
Yes.
And often grossly underestimate how important the physiology is. That said, you can never get to the point of changing your physiology without behavior as well. They're so deeply interlinked. And I think about three big things in that area. It's like you often talk to people about just managing their blood glucose levels, either just the sugar crash, hypoglycemia during the day, or just managing their glucose and insulin overall. Good luck changing your behavior when your blood sugar and insulin are just surging all over the place. And it's very easy to think I'm weak-willed, and it's just nonsense.
Yeah.
and the same goes to what I'm now describing as reward derangement syndrome, which is just dysregulation of the dopamine system. Again, good luck regulating that when you've developed a tolerance for a substance or a behavior, and you've also got a withdrawal situation going on, and your baseline dopamine is down and you're in pain.
Yes.
The system needs physiologically resetting.
Yeah.
And we don't. That's psychophysiology, I suppose. Those are two great examples of where those come together. And you and I both, when we see people that we've worked with over the years, they just go, "Oh, yeah, I'm not hungry anymore."
Yeah.
So that they don't have to fight the willpower.
That's right, exactly. And I think the third one that plays into that is just the role of stress physiology on mental health, and how, I think it's now been pretty well established and accepted by most serious people that depression is not caused by low serotonin, and it appears to be that it's stress induced glutamate damage and other mechanisms from stress. And so there's the physiological driver of at least one mental health condition, and probably more. I mean, I think when you look at ADHD, I had Professor Martin Aams on. I think it's Aams. He's a Dutch guy. Does a lot of research in ADHD and has actually written some very nice papers linking poor sleep to ADHD symptoms. And actually showing not only sleep but sunlight, and showing the very strong correlation in the United States and in Europe between areas of low sunlight and increased ADHD symptoms and diagnosis, right? So there's definitely a physiological response or a physiological driver of at least a number of, I think you can put depression, anxiety, and ADHD in there, and you throw those three in. How much of the mental health conditions do those three cover? And a lot of it's driven by physiology, by poor diet, lack of exercise, and poor sleep hygiene.
Yeah, and I suppose there's probably a fourth one there, which I suppose done by getting your sleep right and getting outside, is the physiological effects of light.
Yep.
Hitting the body and going different depths into the body, and even this new stuff with the far infrared, where it's penetrating the cells into the individual mitochondria and moving electrons in the electron transport chain. I mean, I just find that stuff unbelievable. Here's something with no mass, no charge, travel billions of kilometers, and it's moving electrons around in your mitochondria and having favorable effects. It's an astonishing thing.
Yeah, I think who was it? Einstein. He talked about. He called quantum physics spooky action at a distance. I think we can now put light and near infrared and red light into that category. It's spooky action at a distance, right? It's just crazy, the amount of stuff. And I've actually written a chapter on light in my book on hardiness, which is also just about to be released, actually.
Okay, so what's the book called?
It's called The Hardiness Effect. So it's basically what I did is I took what I was looking at in my PhD, psychophysiological interventions, and I included hardiness in my PhD, but then brought in the physiology, and my whole thing, as you know, and very similar to you, is bringing the psychology and the physiology together. So there's a bucket load of research of the benefits of psychological hardiness, but for me. This book is bringing that into people's knowledge, but also adding in the physiological component through a topic that we are both big fans of, which is hormesis, and that intermittent exposure to stressors, how it is nature's mechanism for physiological hardiness, how the host, whether it's a rat, a fruit fly, a worm, a rodent, or a human, when they're exposed to the stress of exercise intermittently, the stress of cold, the stress of heat, hypoxia, they get upregulation of protective genes that actually make them better because of exposure to stress.
I mean, it's an immutable principle of nature and how organisms in nature operate and adapt to the world they live in without, I guess, what we're calling hormesis, but we're adapting into a more lay word of hardiness.
Yes.
Is immutable. And I guess on the flip side of that, the argument is that modern medicine has taken virtually no notice of this principle. Some would argue, and I tend to agree, that we followed Pasteur's idea of germ theory, which is a good one, to the bitter end, really, in medicine. And I suppose antidepressants I'd see as the very, very pointy end of medicines that cause some harm and hardly any good. And then his contemporary at the time, the other Frenchman, Antoine Beauchamp, was arguing that it's interesting that for the exact same exposure to pathogens, some organisms wither away and die, some become sick, some stay the same, some get a little bit sick and come back stronger than they were before. And Pasteur never took into account the terrain of the organism. And I suppose that's the shift both you and I are profoundly looking for in medicine, is to imagine a world where medicine understood hardiness, or the biological term hormesis, and used it.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a massive gap, but there's huge opportunity there, I think. But there's a hell of a lot of both research and education that needs to be done on this. But a lot of people, they do it and they feel the benefits. The people who are out there regularly exercising will tell you that they feel better. Like it just feels good to be fit and to be able to lift heavy shit. It feels good physically. It feels good psychologically. And anybody who's ever done cold water exposure like me and you, or got into saunas, knows that you feel fantastic afterwards. And there's very good reasons for that, because there are changes in your biology acutely and chronically, when you do these things over time, that just make you function better as an organism.
What are you, and where are we going with this hardiness lab? I mean, my understanding, but you're really leading the way here, is getting research done now in academia and more at large, like we are as well, free of drug companies, has become a very difficult thing to do. But yet, the very things that confer the most health, we don't study at all.
Yeah, and it's something that I get frustrated by. I think anybody who knows how to read research is probably frustrated by this. I think anybody who's been at the coalface like yourself is frustrated about this, because it's so hard to get research dollars if it's not from big food or big pharma or some other vested interest. And you always have to look at those publications with a critical eye. So there's meddling, whether it's intentional or sort of under the surface. There's these things often are clouded, and we are very keen in the Hardiness Lab. So we're just about to launch the Hardiness Lab, me and yourself, about doing research that actually matters and testing real world lifestyle interventions to see if we can improve people's mental health and their physical health and their longevity and their markers of longevity or health span. For me, it's just it's so exciting. But the challenge for us in the Hardiness Lab is going to be raising the money to actually get the research done in a very effective manner.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack in this whole thing. We talk about hot, cold, exercise, diet, sleep, breath, the suite of tools, but what are the doses?
Yes.
What's the combination of these, and how do they exist? Does it get to a point where one takes away from the other? What does that look like? And it's just an evidence-free zone there, but yet we need that evidence, because these are some of the most important tools that exist today for our health, and we haven't. What have we done? We've been asleep at the wheel as far as modern medicine's concerned.
Yeah, I mean, even take one of those like exercise. There's been a lot of studies done on exercise. So if we look at those, all of those things that you talked about: exercise, nutrition, sleep, my sort of breath work, cold heat exposure. Probably the most rigorously tested would be exercise, and I think there's very strong evidence about the benefits. We know a reasonable amount about the optimal dose and frequency around cardiovascular training, probably less so around strength training, and there's a number of reasons for that. But we still know that one of the biggest predictors of how long you're going to live is your muscle strength, right? Your VO2 max is a stronger predictor, but muscle strength, rather than muscle mass per se, is a strong predictor of how long you're going to live. And why is it muscle strength versus muscle mass? But then when you look at something like cold, which is all over the internet, the cold exposure, the ice baths, we don't know the dose. We don't know the right temperature. We have then people coming out talking about women are different to men and shouldn't be doing the same protocols as men. And whilst that's very true, as you and I both know, Grant, any study involving humans, the result that you get is an averaged out result. But when you look at the individuals, there's big individual variation. There's big individual variation in responses to exercise, time and type. Nutrition, there's big individual variations. And there's no reason why the same wouldn't apply to cold and heat exposure. That yes,
100%.
Women would be different than men, but some women will be different than other women, and some men will be different to other men. And
and we need to understand those. And
yes.
I mean, the same applies to, there's a lot said about fasting and women, and like we need to be understanding that better as well. And there's a whole bunch of stuff I want to do there. I personally think the potential negative effects there are not known, and then they're overstated as being known when they're not known. And I'd be really careful about that. I'm not saying there's not negative effects sometimes of extra stress. Of course there is, but what's the context?
Yes, and male versus female, perimenopausal, postmenopausal versus not in menopause, and then also individuals like, what's the other stress load in your life? What's your genetics? How do they interact with all of these things? I mean, there's so much that we've got to really unpack in all of these areas, but that's the stuff that we're keen to do because nobody else is doing it, right?
No, and also I think the sort of the extra data streams you can get from devices as they're coming online now is going to be really useful. Including HRV and all those things. But I think watch the next few years, and we start to get estimates of other blood measures coming through in real time will completely change the way that we can operate with this field.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the HRV stuff's very interesting, right? Because your listeners won't know, but I went through open heart surgery in January, and really interesting to look at my HRV. My HRV, which had been bouncing around with Apple Watch at around 50 for the last 18 months, plummeted down into the low teens. And then started to recover. After about 3 weeks, it started to recover. And my surgeon actually said to me, you need to get your head around the idea that you are going to be the equivalent of being hit by a bus.
Wow.
Right? And you saw that in my HRV. And then as it improved, I was feeling better. And I started doing CrossFit, I think, on week 4 at modified. But I was sort of pushing the envelope bit by bit with progressive overload. But my HRV just kept climbing. And then a few weeks ago, it was really interesting. I came home and I said to Carly, I came home from CrossFit and I went, I think my cardio's going backwards. There's something going on. And over the period of a week or two, I'm like, fuck, this is not good. I'm going backwards. And I called my cardiologist. He said, let's get you in for an echo when you come back. But I also thought, shit, I need to go and do my blood work. Got my blood work back, and I'd turned anemic again.
Oh, really? How did that happen?
I have no idea. So that's the question. Now, the anemia and the low hemoglobin, my hemoglobin dropped to 8.
Wow.
So if you can't carry oxygen around your body, you're going to struggle with your cardio.
You're going to be hopeless, yeah.
But the point is, my HRV dropped at the same time. Yeah. So it's interesting, just the links with HRV on subjective measures of how I'm feeling, and then more objective around my exercise performance and those linkages, which I found really interesting. And then the blood test and the iron and hemoglobin levels.
So what are you doing to get your iron back up?
Well, I had an infusion just before I went on holidays. 2 weeks ago today, I had an infusion, and then today I was back in seeing a mate of mine, Professor Steve Selig. So he's a professor of cardiac rehab, and he took me through. We did an exercise test, not quite to VO2 max. He measured. We went to VO2 peak. I probably had about a minute left in me, but I got to 158 on my heart rate, which is over 90% of my max, and felt a lot better than I did a few weeks ago. So the iron's kicking in. It takes 3 or 4 weeks, as you know, to really kick in properly.
And you get B12. Do they inject you with B12 as well?
B12, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So interesting. Just the links with heart rate variability, which is a kind of a measure of how well your body is dealing with stress, and just subjective feelings and objective data. It's really been an interesting journey.
Yeah, wow, that's interesting. Hey, why don't we talk more about you? I just want to. I thought we'd do it in front of people. I'd probably these are some the next set of questions is. What I'd ask Paul if I was just sitting down with him on the couch anyway, talking about stuff. So the first is, I mean, one of the things I really admire about you is you're an excellent science communicator. It's sort of cool. I aspire to do that as well. But you're an excellent actual presenter, and you're an excellent podcast. Why don't we talk about the podcast first? I just want to get your reflection on 2 episodes. So first of all, I want to tell you what my favorite Paul Taylor podcast episode was. It's with a guy called Ken Mogi. He's a Japanese ikigai specialist, and I think he described himself randomly as like a neuroscience rock star or something.
Yes, Japanese neuroscience rock star. He was brilliant. He was brilliant.
So how did you even get hold of that guy, and what did you make of that whole podcast?
Yeah, so how I got hold of him, it was actually Carly, because she studied Japanese psychology. And Ikigai's all over the internet. And there's this thing that you'll have probably seen, the interaction between, I think it's something you love, something you get paid for, something you're passionate about, something the world needs. Yeah. And there's that all over the internet about Ikigai. And it's not. It's some random dude who wrote a blog post and actually changed out the word purpose for Ikigai. And he's actually then wrote a subsequent blog post going, hey, actually, I'm not saying, mine was just me messing around, but everybody thinks that that's what Ikigai is. And so Carly was like, this is just wrong. And then she found Ken Mogi. And he'd written a book on Ikigai as well. He's written 50 books or something like that. He's a machine. So we got him on, we reached out to him, and he came on the podcast, and he was absolutely brilliant. But he explained Ikigai as well as a lot of other Japanese concepts. So that was really cool. But that all goes down to Carly, both from spotting the flaw in the internet and finding Ken Mogi and getting him on the podcast.
Yeah, so I recommend that. If you're not already on the Paul Taylor podcast, get on it. But then I recommend that one. But how many podcasts have you done now?
It's a few hundred. I actually have lost count. I don't really know, to be honest.
So
I should know this, shouldn't I?
Yeah. In the minute, you should be saying 465 or something. What's the one that sticks in your mind as the most memorable, if there is such a one? I'd be interested to know that.
Other than the 3 with Professor Grant Schofield.
Yeah, right.
Fucking hell! There's so many. A brilliant one with Stuart Shanker. Where it was talking about stress in his work with kids with adverse childhood experiences. and he was talking about behavior in those kids, and they're labeled, as behavioral issues, and he's going, they're not behavioral issues, they're stress issues. They're having a stress response that's driving their behavior. That was really enlightening, and I love the research that he is actually doing. There's another couple that spring to mind. I've done 3 now, and you should get this guy on with Stanley Beecham. We done a couple of crackers, and then I got him on again quite recently, and said, "Hey mate, what have you been up to?" And he says, "Oh well, I've just recovered from stage 4 leukemia." I was like, "Fuck!" And so we started talking about, and I'd obviously just had open heart surgery, so we had a very organic conversation about death and facing your own death and your own mortality. And I think that was a cracker. It was very organic, very authentic, and lots of take homes for people. And then actually that recent one that I did with the Dutch professor Martin Arms, I think his surname is. That was really cool just to see stuff that I have suspected, but he's actually done the research around the
and
impact
what does he do?
of. He is a biological psychiatrist. Yeah. So he's not interested in talk therapy. He's interested in the biology, and has done a lot of stuff developing and testing TMS, transmagnetic stimulation of the brain for depression and things like that, but also then analyzing lifestyle factors in mental health, done a whole heap of work around the ADHD, and then found that you could use heart rate to optimize the TMS stuff in the brain, right? Which is a brand new discovery, because they were using MRI to do that, I think, or EEG. I can't remember which, but it was laborious and expensive. I think it was MRI. And they actually discovered that you could actually wire somebody up and use their heart rate and their heart rate variability to optimize where the EEG was going on. And it's that connection from the vagus nerve.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool shit. Really cool. So that was probably more for the likes of me and you, that podcast, because it was a geek out. But any of the ones with Stan Beecham, I think, have been absolutely brilliant. He just has a way of delivering stuff that I absolutely love.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, that reminds me, there's an engineering guy, professor here at University of Auckland, and they use a combination of machine learning and AI to look at the different periods between all of the electrical activity in the heart, the whole PQRS complex, and they notice quite a bit that you can tell about the body with different patterns and durations through that. And they were actually getting to the stage where they were able to proxy both blood glucose and lactate from some combination of heart rate into bits and pieces between the electrical things and the beats themselves.
Wow.
Well, but it makes sense, right? Like the heart is changing the way it fires, and electrical activity and fuel availability. And when you figure out that lactate's actually a preferred fuel for the heart, it's probably going to alter things slightly. You're never going to figure it out yourself, but you get enough data and you feed it back into machine learning and AI models with known lactates and glucose things, and double-blinded data sets. I think that's got a lot of potential, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is sort of cool. Okay, more back to PT. So another thing I would ask you if I was just sitting there, it's like, if anyone's heard you speak, it's actually an astonishing performance. Like, you're really top of the game. If you haven't seen Paul speak, people out there, go somewhere where you can see Paul speak, because it's a sort of combination of entertainment, engagement, and actually pretty high level science. Like, how did you even get into that thing as part of your profession, and what do you have to do? What do you say to someone who hasn't started that?
Yeah, so I'm not the ideal person, because I kind of fell into it, right? when I left the armed forces, and I think my armed forces has got a fair bit to do with it. As an armed forces officer, you know, you have to do a lot of presenting, and you've got to be on it if you're going to present in the armed forces, because people will rip you to shreds if you're shit. But then when I moved over here, I set up as a physiologist, nutritionist, and it was actually one of my clients, a guy called Rod Gossard. A shout out to the old Gossard, who was quite a senior executive in NAB, and he asked me to come in and do a talk for his team. And his boss was in the talk. It was about energy management, because I was always talking to Rod about managing his energy. So he brought me in, and I did a talk to the leadership team of technology operations. And it went down pretty well. I remember there's a guy, his boss was a guy called Jeff Walsh, who I now work with. He's now a consultant, but he ran technology operations. He had a $300 million budget, right? And he asked me to come and see him afterwards. And we sat down, and he had my invoice, and he slid it across the table to me. And he said, and I'm thinking, oh shit, what's going on here? Because it was the first corporate talk that I'd done, right?
Yeah, right.
And he said to me, at the risk of creating a monster, can you take this away and double it and then resubmit it?
How does that ever happen? It's like you're thinking, he's going, what the hell do you think you've got any business charging us for?
Exactly. And he said to me, you're going to find out that NAB, National Australia Bank, he says it's like the Australian cricket team. He says it's really hard to get into, but once you're in, you're in. And that's what's happened. You know, that was probably 18 years ago, and I have been still bouncing around NAB. I've done talks every year for NAB for the last 18 years. I've even done their entire leadership team, the top 100 and stuff like that. So I bounced around. So it was that kick-started it. And I had other stuff going on. You know, I was a physiologist and nutritionist in private practice. So it kind of grew organically, and I just got the odd talk here and there. And then it just started getting legs over the years. And then it came to the point when because I then had a registered training organization that I started, and I brought a CEO in to manage that. I had a gym. And then I actually one day went, I'm getting so many talks here that this could actually be me full time, and that's it. So I made the leap across. But I'm not a good person to advise somebody, because mine grew organically over a period of 7 or 8 years just through referrals. Like I never spent a single penny on marketing. It was all word of mouth. Which is the best way to grow a business is through word of mouth. And then, you know, executives change roles, and then people have brought me in. And, you know, I did a talk a couple of months ago for a lady at ANZ. She's very senior now, who I'd done stuff with her in NAB 15 years ago. So mine has just been through word of mouth. And look, I guess the take home for people wanting to get into it is you've got to really know your shit, right? Backwards, upside down. I don't look at slides. I know exactly. I can put a slide up and talk to it without looking at it. So people always say that, you know, that strikes people in the audience. But I think the other thing is passion and authenticity. I think that's the feedback that I get, that I'm super passionate. The passion comes out. I think the Irish accent probably helps a bit.
Yeah, I was going to say that. I always sort of say that to diffuse things a bit, but if that were the case, then, you know, as you travelled across Australia and New Zealand, you'd see all these Irishmen talking, and you don't really.
Yeah, well, that's true. But I think the accent helps with passion, like a Northern Irish and a Scots accent. They have that kind of guttural passion automatically. But I think it's also authenticity. Like I'm not, you see speakers who are just so fucking staged, and you can tell that they've been coached around their hand movements and some of it. Like I get some of it, but some people I see that where it's just, you can see they're just not authentic. And I think you have to be your authentic self. I think audiences can smell it at 50 paces if you're not authentic. And I think they like authenticity and they like passion.
Yeah, I guess the power of the story that is your real stories.
Yes.
That also show that I 100% agree. If you don't, knowing your stuff's not enough.
Yes.
But for God's sake, if you don't know that, well, you've got nothing.
Yeah, that's right.
So you've got that. You seem to draw energy. Like I know a lot of people turn up for public speaking and get worried about it. Do you get nervous or
no, I get excited.
Energized?
I get excited. And you know, I mean, this is the thing, right? As you know, nerves and excitement are the exact same chemicals.
That's right.
It's adrenaline, noradrenaline, and if it's severe, is a bit of cortisol. But it's about how you view it. You know, telling yourself I'm excited rather than I'm nervous. This is my body preparing me for action. I think is really key. That challenge orientation actually affects your physiology.
That's actually a pretty important reframe of that. I agree with what you're saying there.
Yeah, 100%. And I just love what I do. You know, I love the chance to get in front of. I speak to a lot of senior executives. To just give them the no judgment but no bullshit advice around things, and I think that also helps when there's just this guy's not waffling. There's no fluffy bullshit here. He's just telling it like it is, but he's not pointing the finger at me saying you're a wanker. You know, it's just like, here's the data. You make your mind up.
What will be more fun for you?
Sorry, Grant. The last thing I would throw in there, I think you mentioned it, is the storytelling. You know, you've got to be able to tell stories if you're, because speaking is telling a story. So just getting good at storytelling and weaving a narrative, I think is useful. And you see the best comedians are storytellers as well.
Mm.
Right.
I suppose the other thing about storytelling, the only way to accumulate meaningful stories is to engage fully in the business of life.
Yes.
Because as soon as you do that, like boots and all, then stuff happens as part of life. But unless you do that, things tend not to happen. Not much happens on the couch, to be honest.
No, exactly. So I'm able to weave in, you know, all my military experience, my travel, you know, in deep in the Amazon jungle, having frog poison pushed into my veins by a shaman 2,000 kilometers from the nearest road. You know, there tend to be good stories around stuff, you know, my boxing, my karate, all of those sorts of things. And then just bringing a bit of humor into it and making the audience laugh every day. I think the other thing I would say for aspiring speakers is you got to take people on through the gamut of emotions. You've got to make them think. You've got to make them laugh. You've got to make them, you know, maybe cry, but maybe not cry. But you've got to evoke a range of emotions and take people on an emotional journey through your content. I think if you can do that with a bit of authenticity and passion, then that would, I think, be the recipe for a good speaker.
That's right. And the other thing you tend to be good at is you finish generally with hope.
Yes.
As an emotion. I think that's an important
that's right.
a thing that they end up with, which is, you know, just fundamental to our humanity, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, we're moving to the science section now. And the science section for today, Paul Taylor, unbeknown to you, is weight loss medicines. Your time starts now. No.
Actually, Grant, before we get into that, there's one other thing that I just thought about why I did my PhD.
Oh, yeah.
To finally extinguish imposter syndrome.
Surely you haven't had that.
Oh, yeah. Fucking everybody's had imposter syndrome. Yeah. And look, I don't have it now. I certainly did have it when I was starting my public speaking. Just a little bit of nagging imposter syndrome. And part of, not a huge part, but certainly a little part of the PhD was just around the kind of credibility and to extinguish the little, I would call them embers of a fire of imposter syndrome now. So it wasn't significant, but I think I'd be lying if I said it didn't play a role.
Yeah. Well, I think I can add, and I reveal it here, and I think it's going to be okay to do that. Paul and I weren't able to speak to each other for several months because I ended up being one of the examiners on your thesis. I just want to publicly say I thought you did a really fabulous job of it. I've marked quite a few of these over the years, and it was in the top few. And then you add on to that the fact that you're fully living life with your whole family's still at home, quite a lot of stuff going on, traveling with work, doing
writing
a
a second book.
You're writing it. Well, you wrote another whole book while you're writing up your PhD thesis. I never heard of anyone doing that. That's
stupid.
Hats off to you.
Stupid's probably.
Yeah, I mean, you would have been pleased to see the end of it when you handed it in, right?
I certainly was, but this is the thing. Every cloud has a silver lining. Open heart surgery enabled me to do those two things together because there's a fucking shitload of time sitting in bed or not being able to do stuff, and I just thought I'm going to use this every single minute of it to knock these two things out.
Yeah, right. You couldn't rush off and do some talks in several Australian cities in the same day. Okay, yeah. Okay, weight loss drugs.
Yes.
What do we make of the whole rise of GLP-1 agonists, Ozempics, Wegovys and stuff? And what's the scene like in Australia? Have you seen anything there?
Lots of chat around it. I think there's chat around it everywhere. I mean, you'll know as much as me, Grant. Every week there seems to be another study coming out about the other benefits of these weight loss drugs, whether it's on heart health, cognitive decline. So they're very real. I think there's still a little bit of a stigma with some people about taking these drugs, and that there's this stigma around whether they're actually taking the easy way out. So I think there's a shitload of people who are on these drugs who are not telling people that they're on these drugs. Because they've tried very hard, a lot of them, genuinely, to lose weight. They're probably getting shithouse advice. Like, you take my mother, who was a diabetic for 40 years, was massively overweight, and was constantly told by diabetes educators that she needed to have a high carbohydrate diet, but low GI. And it was only when she came to Camp Taylor and went on a high fat, moderate protein, low carb diet that she lost 20 kilos and finally managed to get a handle on her diabetes. But there's people who are trying to do the right thing, and they're getting bullshit advice from the health agencies that are out there, which, that'd be a whole nother podcast on why it's so conflicted. But just for the listeners who don't know, in the United States, I'm not sure what it's like over there, but in the United States, I think it's 29 of the 32 people on the dietary guidelines recommendations have got ties to big food or big pharma. And it's it's completely fucked, right? So I think what all that means is there's a lot of people out there, some of them who've tried and maybe had a little bit of success, but then put the weight back on because, as you know about set point theory, it's really hard to get rid of it if it's been on there for years. And then they take these drugs and they can be life-changing. But I know somebody who's taken the drugs and went off them because of the side effects that they were feeling.
The nausea or
nausea and gastrointestinal stuff. Yeah.
And it's interesting, if you go out to a 2-year point in real life, most people aren't taking them after 2 years. They decide that's not worth the side effects. And the 2-year data is very different than Novo Nordisk's 2-year data, where the weight loss was down around 5% rather than closer to the 20% with the third generation drugs. So it's interesting. The real world experience is a little bit different. With that. So
Like any of these things, right? Like the antidepressant story, you listen to them. There's very little side effects. Whereas you look at the real world, there's a bucket heap of side effects. Yeah. We had the conversation. I think we had the conversation. I remember talking to someone. I see somebody at my CrossFit gym who is into medical research, and I was talking a number of weeks ago about the next generation of these things, and I was like, that they're going to be bringing myokines into these drugs, and that will be a game changer to preserve the muscle, because the big issue with these drugs, as you well know, Grant, is that a lot of that weight loss was muscle, and then if the people. So just to explain for the uninitiated, if you lose 10 kilos of weight, it might be 6 or 7 of fat and 3 or 4 of muscle. So you come down 10 kilos, you then find that it's unsustainable. Either your diet's unsustainable or with these drugs, there's the side effects. And I think they lose a lot more muscle. And then your body then goes back to that set point, but you put on all fat and very little, if any, muscle, unless you're doing some serious strength training. So you end up back at the same weight, but now your body composition has changed and you're relatively more fat and less muscle. And that means if you resume your normal diet, you will actually put on more weight because muscle is metabolically active, right? So your resting metabolic rate has gone down. So that I think was the big problem that these guys had to solve. And I think they're obviously very aware of it. That's something that has to be solved. And when that is solved, that puts them into another category, I think, in terms of their effectiveness, but opens up another can of worms.
Okay, so we'll get into that study that just came out yesterday in one moment. I just got a couple of comments on it myself, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
I think, first of all, and this sort of scapegoats the GLP-1 agonists unfairly. There's no obesity drug that wasn't eventually withdrawn from the market because of its side effect profile. Yeah. And I'm not saying that GLP-1s are there yet, but I'm suspicious that will be the case as it plays out. On the other hand, so you see studies coming out both ways, right? So, sorting your metabolism out and getting to a reasonable weight, but it's probably more metabolism than weight, is highly beneficial. And you're seeing people saying, well, now this should be an off-label treatment for Alzheimer's, for cancer, for things,
heart disease,
heart disease, and I think it's probably true actually that's the thing. And then you see actually some studies showing actually improvements in all-cause mortality. Like that's the holy grail in public health.
Yes.
To show that. On the other hand, what do you do about and the optic nerve neuropathy is an interesting one, right? So that's a serious eye disease, causes blindness. About 3% of diabetics that's probably where the signal's sitting now, are going to get that. You go, man, is that worth it? I don't know. And then people are making jokes. You've lost weight, but you can't see it, and like. I didn't say that. No, just jokes. So you've got this whole balance, right? And then you've got the muscle mass loss. You're right. On the other hand, I've had a client, young 16-year-old boy, 160 kilos, bitter divorce. No one's talked to him at school that year. Just the abuse that's going on. Like, I don't know if I wouldn't put him on it,
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the humane thing to do. Okay, hey, let's get into this one that's just come out. I'll just pop the earphone back in. I'll just tell you about this study. So this is a class of drugs called myostatin inhibitors, which we both Googled. People can do this on their own computer. Google myostatin inhibitors and go to the images part of Google. And Paul, what do you see?
You see fucking the Arnold Schwarzenegger of the mouse and rat world.
And dogs and fucking
dogs,
sheep and cows.
Just crazy.
What does a jacked sheep look like?
Yeah.
So myostatins are sort of a protein that limits muscle hypertrophy, muscle growth, and I would say evolutionary thinking, it's probably a pretty important thing. Extra muscle when it's not needed is actually a real burden when energy availability is an issue, which it has been for most of the time humans have been on the planet, right? So you want to be able to limit muscle hypertrophy because too much of it's going to, without a requirement for it, it's going to be an energy cost that you don't want to sustain as a species. What do you reckon about that as a description?
Look, absolutely. I think there's a very good reason for myostatin. I mean, most of the myokine, so this is a myokine, which is a molecule produced from contracting muscle, that signaling molecule, and myostatin is the one that stops muscle growth. So it's tightly regulated by evolution and evolution doesn't make mistakes like this. And there's a very good reason. I think you're bang on with the reason. Interestingly, Grant, I wonder whether there's an offshoot on this. Why? When you look at all the data, sorry, and we're diverging and we will come back. But when you look at all the data around exercise and the impact on longevity, although these are hard to tease out, we know with cardiovascular exercise, it seems to be, it kind of peaks at its optimal, where you start to then get a trade-off as around 10 hours a week. Whereas resistance training appears from the research to be much, much lower at around 2.5 hours a week. And this is perplexing me. Like, why strength training appears to you start to lose some of the benefits around that 2.5 hours, whereas cardio it's around 10. And I'm wondering whether, there's two things that popped into my head. The people who do a bucket heap of strength training, a lot more than that, how many of them are taking steroids? That then is impacting on their longevity profile. But is there something going on with excessive muscle mass that we don't know? Because it seems to be muscle strength, not mass, that is very strongly tied to increase in health span and lifespan.
And we need to come back to that when we explain these trials in there, because you might get more muscle, but you might not be stronger. So there you getting the benefits. Yeah, that's really interesting.
So that's a little question in the back of my head that plays into to this, right? But yes, look, myostatin is there. It's a nature's check and balance on muscle, and I think Grant, you're absolutely right. You don't want to put on muscle that isn't going to have a functional outcome in a world where calories are scarce.
Yep. Okay, let's explain this trial that's just been released at the annual meeting of the American Diabetes Association, July 2025. It's a compound, look at this right, called bimagrunab, which is a compound that Eli Lilly, one of the big pharma companies, bought another company just to get that molecule patent for $2 billion.
Jesus Christ. And I know why they did it, right? Straight away.
Well, first of all, they were saying this was originally designed in muscular degenerative diseases. So
yes,
it inhibits the process. So you uncouple the myokine from stopping muscle growth, and you see the animal models. Animals just keep growing muscle. You got degenerative disorder like muscular dystrophy. That's really a beneficial thing. But that's not what the trial was. The stage 2B trial, a randomized placebo-controlled study sponsored by Eli Lilly, had 3 arms, and I'll tell you what the arms were. One was the bimagrunab, 30 milligrams per kilo, weight loss minus 10.8%, lean mass change plus 2.5%.
Wow.
So these people have lost 10% fat and gained 2% muscle mass with no training and not a change in not a prescribed change in diet. That's an astonishing.
That's insane.
That's an astonishing thing. So then they did 2 other things. So they gave them just the GLP-1 agonists, and they lost 15.7% body weight, but they lost 7.4% muscle mass, which is a sort of typical result, right? So a third of the weight loss coming from muscle mass loss. So you've lost quite a bit of weight, but it's not favourable, as we say.
So, Grant, sorry, can I clarify? Was that they lost 7.4% of their muscle mass, or half of that 15% of weight loss was muscle?
No, an additional, so they've lost 15%. Okay. So they lost 20% in all.
Right.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So, or 22%, which is about as good as you get. A combination of both of those drugs, minus 22% body fat, but still now a 2.7% loss in muscle mass. Now, that's a really interesting result. So they're going for the GLP drugs therapy, the GLP drugs plus the inhibitor, or just the inhibitor. Now, I would say the inhibitor is, I don't know what the side effect profile is. Again, this is a phase 2 trial, so they are looking for adherence and negative effects. They're saying they saw none. You can't really believe them. But I would say that's a really interesting medicine to think about what role that's going to play in society. One that confers muscle mass and fat loss at the same time. It appears to have a pretty good safety profile, at least so far. Who knows? You're going to see a different world. I can't imagine, especially as we both get older, which we all are, actually all of the audiences, that is an astonishing thing to, unlock one of the limiting factors on muscle mass gain. And I'm not for medicines. I'm just saying that, but it's just an incredible thing.
It is an absolute game changer. I mean, I think anybody who knows anything about metabolism or health knew that they had to solve the muscle loss puzzle. Now they appear with this, and we need to be careful. This is just one trial, so all the caveats go. It's got to be repeated, but more importantly, Grant, I think we need to see it repeated by independent labs and not sponsored by Eli Lilly.
Yeah, 100%.
When that comes out, it's like holy shit. If it comes out that it's similar to this, this is what probably the biggest game changer in medicine, or one of, in the last couple of decades for sure, because it's just obesity and all of the related issues, the diabetes and the related issues on heart disease, on Alzheimer's, dementia, and we're already seeing some of those benefits from just the GLP-1s. But if they can preserve muscle mass as well, and not, only lose 2.7% with 22% body fat, like that just changes somebody's metabolic profile over the period of a couple of months. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, but then what's going to be happening? I mean, okay, Martha and Frank down at the old folks' home are going to be jacked, but that's great, and they're not going to have metabolic disease, and they're going to be cognitively better off. The whole box and dice, that's great. But are people still going to be mainlining Doritos and tequila shots in, or what's
this is part of the issue, right? And this is the issue that I have with the GLP-1s. And again, to call it out, not judging anybody. I'm not judging anybody, but this gives people an easy way out, right? So yes, you have those people who are overweight, diabetic, who've tried, genuinely, really tried. And then you have a bunch of people who've half-heartedly tried or haven't really tried at all.
Or got poor advice.
Or got poor advice, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But for them, and for the people who are not willing to put the effort in and just go, medicine will save me, this is an excuse to be lazy, which is one of my concerns. Like, what other benefits do you get from changing your diet and exercising well and fixing your metabolism through physiological processes, right? The benefits on mental health are huge. The benefits on self-control, right? That's a part of the frontal lobes that we know actually grows in volume with exercise. So I now have better self-control to regulate other behaviors in my life. That won't happen You won't get that benefit. You won't get the mental health benefit. But to your point, Grant, if you're continuing to eat shit, your mental health is going to decline. Because part of the reason that exercise is very good for your mental health is the impact of the other myokines, not myostatin, but the other myokines on the brain, irisin and lactate crossing the blood-brain barrier, triggering BDNF, which has huge amounts of benefits for not only cognitive function,
they'll probably start to supplement with
BDNF. Fucking hell. They put BDNF in there, sign me up.
No, but I agree with that. Like the sort of, the reward derangement syndrome, the dopamine system, the whole reward system's still going to be out of kilter, isn't it?
I never thought of that, Grant. That's a really good point. And if we simplify this, it appears that dopamine that is easy appears to have a very different lasting impact or at least acute impact than dopamine that you earn, right? So dopamine that you earn from exercising or getting in an ice bath or getting in a sauna, you get that lift in dopamine. And we know in an ice bath, you get a 200 to 400% increase in dopamine, right?
And it lasts.
And it lasts for hours, right?
Yeah.
But then the come down is it just comes back to homeostasis, whereas easy dopamine from video games, from food, from drugs, you get a big spike of dopamine that doesn't last as long, but then you get a plummet through below, and that's when you feel shit. So the concern here is I think there's going to be unintended consequences here, right?
It's an interesting time to be alive, though, isn't it? I want to see what happens with myostatin inhibitors, and we're probably going to get to see it. That's awesome. And likewise, on the other side, like you wait to see what the world looks like when you get every house has an Optimus robot in it.
Yeah.
Like talk about no one has to do any hard stuff anymore, for God's sake. Imagine that.
Yes, exactly. Man, our hardiness lab will be a theoretical lab.
A world that doesn't exist anymore. But that's just like, what is the world going to look like, and how are we going to negotiate this in a way? And I think this whole hardiness thing will end up being crucial. Do you have to go into augmented reality to get hard stuff? Or something? Oh wow.
What? Yeah, you're right. It's like what does it look like? With all of the, I mean, you just look at the AI and the impact that's having, both good and bad, right? And then there's this stuff, there's good and bad. Anybody who says that all of this stuff is either good or bad is completely bonkers, right? It depends, and the conversation is much more nuanced. And again, with these things, it's how they're used, because I know in the United States, a lot of people are taking it off-label, and they're just microdosing GLP-1s, right?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting thing. That's an interesting thing, and that needs to be studied. And actually, as these myostatin inhibitors come up, that'll probably be a thing as well.
Yeah. Oh, mate, where do you see the bodybuilding community get onto these things? Because already peptides are rife, right? Through which you can't. I mean, I've had experts on the podcast. You can buy peptides legally. They will sell you them in air brackets for research use, but there's nothing to stop people buying peptides and injecting them into themselves. And there are a shitload of people in the fitness community who are injecting peptides into themselves. So growth hormone or upstream of growth hormone and all of these muscle building peptides. People are already taking them and are walking around absolutely jacked. And there's places in the States where the doctors will prescribe a bunch of peptides for people who are our age, Grant, right? I'm talking to people in the States who are seeing their doctor, and the doctor is putting them on, these longevity doctors have them on a bunch of peptides. Their muscle mass has gone through the roof. They feel fucking amazing. but we don't know what the
What happens?
long-term effects of these things are, right? So there is a wild west out there of people experimenting with stuff, and you know, that myostatin inhibitor is essentially a peptide, right? That's what it is. And so the GLP-1s, are they a peptide? I'm imagining
No, because
not.
it just antagonizes the production of the hormone.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
But it's just it's ways of whether it's peptides or GLP-1s or any sorts of drugs. There are ways what they're essentially doing is they're interfering with your natural metabolism in these cases in a way that's beneficial. But what are the side effects, short term and particularly long term? What are those side effects?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's been the problem in psychiatric medicine. You know, interfere with one little part of brain homeostatic function at your own peril, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, that was reminding me, just to finish up with, I think, like there's all this dystopia, but there's all this cool stuff coming. And there's a great opening line to the book that every kid our age was made to read at school, called A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens.
Oh, yeah.
When he starts it up going, it's the best of times, it's the worst of times. And, but he's commenting on England that's moving from a frugal, society with lords and manors and serfs and whatnot through to the Industrial Revolution. And there's all this displacement. That's more or less how New Zealand and Australia got formed in many ways. And all this bad stuff happening. At the same time, there was never more opportunity and a brave, exciting new world as well. And I think that's probably been the case the entire way through human history. Through the Enlightenment, through Industrial Revolution, through the Mechanical Revolution, and then the Space Age, Information Age, and now it's just sort of sped up. So this whole AI thing is just. These changes used to happen in generations and then decades and then years. And like where we're at the moment, it's just an astonishing thing. Like this stuff is happening. We'll probably know way more tomorrow about the world than we know today. And then in a month's time, there'll be a new version of X, Y, and Z out. Like it's just an amazing, like, I don't know what's going to happen, but it's sort of fun seeing it.
Oh, absolutely. And AI interacting with medicine, like the shit that they're able to do now and speed stuff up in terms of, we are very, very close, I think, to the world of personalized medicine, where they will look at your genome and you will get a specific drug based on a massive AI database that this is the one that's going to work best for you, right? We are very, very close to that, I think. But I think, to your point, with the best of times and the worst of times, I have a concern around these new class of GLP-1s with the myostatin, and particularly around people just going, well, fuck it, I can just eat what I want. Do you know, I heard a stat yesterday that 75% of all calories consumed globally are produced by 6 companies.
Holy shit. Which makes them virtually all ultra-processed foods as well,
exactly.
or GM.
Yeah, and these guys then jump on the bandwagon around research and stuff, and they'll just be going, "Hey, you can eat what you want, and there'll be no consequences." Right? There is a beautiful match in their eyes with the pharma companies who are producing these drugs and the food companies who are able to sell highly profitable, highly palatable, ultra-processed foods that make them a shitload of money, that make the supermarkets more money. So all the little greengrocers are getting pushed out, and then people are eating increasing amounts of shit, and then pharma come along the other end and solve it. That's my concern, that this gets worse.
Well, my cynical response to that, seeing that Eli Lilly study yesterday, as I emailed a colleague of mine, Dr. Glenn Davies, who was actually a GP of the year in New Zealand for his work in reversing diabetes. I said, Glenn, we're fucked, we might as well give up. And and he came back and goes, oh, shit, looks like it. And then we went back and forth and we decided that it looked like Eli Lilly's shares have gone down from 900 to 600, probably at their low. It'd be a good time to buy. That's the sort of not that we're going to, but
Man, that was the first thought that came into my head as you said Eli Lilly. I'm like, fucking hell, have I got that in my share portfolio? Because this is a game changer.
Yeah. All right, Paul, we'll wrap it up. I really appreciate you taking the time, and we'll talk again soon.
Mate, absolute pleasure as always. Catch you soon.